Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Excellencies, good morning. And it's a great pleasure for me now to have this discussion with, I would say, Professor now, Minister Nabil Fahmy, who is in his current position. He is the Dean of the School of Global and Public Affairs of the American University of Cairo, and very well-known former Minister of Foreign Affairs of his country, and I would say one of the most respected thinkers also in international affairs in the region and worldwide. He's very well known worldwide. And we had many occasions to meet together, in particular, Nabil, in Beijing, where we, in the last few years, have had regular, until the pandemic, a very interesting meeting in Beijing on global affairs with some distinguished Chinese authorities. So, Nabil, thank you very much to have accepted at last, my invitation to participate in the WPC. We are very proud, I repeat, to have you here. And I would like to ask you just to start the discussion, what are your general impressions of the last 2 days, the discussion in terms of perception of the mood of very various people, all interested in the international affairs. This is the first, I remind, the first international gathering of some significance taking place. I'm talking of private institutions on international affairs since the lockdown and so forth and so on. So what is your general impression before we start talking more precisely?
Sure. First of all, Thierry, thank you very much for the invitation. This is a very prestigious event, and the last 2 days have been very informative for me. That we started our dialogue in Beijing and we're actually convening in Emirates, I think, reflects also what's happening around the world in terms of Chinese prominence and Emirate activism and constructivism. So also thank you very much to the hosts for doing this. This has been interesting, and you and I attend many conferences. But it's been interesting because it's about policy. And policy ultimately determines what we do in the future. It isn't simply an analysis of history, which is useful, but not enough to move forward. The other point I really took from all this is there's an underlying emphasis on we have to work together. If you wanted to arrange an event in support of collective action, this is something that is, frankly, a primary event in that respect. Everybody here has been emphasizing we can't do this alone, how strong or how weak we are. The third point is it's been factual, not theory. Everybody has come up with a case, given us the figures, told us the real facts, and then built on the policy orientation. So I can tell you I've been attending the overwhelming majority of the sessions. Every one I've gained insight, information, and I leave not with a sense of euphoria that we have solutions for all our problems. That would be naive, but definitely with a sense that the world wants to work together, at least the thinkers in the world, and in that respect, I want to thank you for convening the event.
Well, thanks to you. I think that what you are saying fits very well with what Dr. Gargash said yesterday, because when you are not, which is the case of most countries represented here, when you are not among the giants, the superpowers, you have to spend a lot of time to understand one another and to try to convince, others of reasonable positions, and includes and rule out the extremist positions. Now, today, most of the day will be discussing Middle East issues at large, Middle East in a very large sense. And I think we have, in the last 2 days, we have often alluded, I would say, to Egypt, but we have not discussed anything precise about Egypt. Egypt is perhaps, historically, the most important, not the superpower, but certainly the most important country. I say that cautiously. I wouldn't want to be attacked on this remark, but in the Middle East, and of course in terms also of population, tradition, and so forth and so on. So how would you describe Egypt's role today in the geopolitical scene of the Middle East, which has been through major transformations in the last 2 years? Of course, I'm thinking of the Abraham Accords, but not only that. So with huge internal problems, of course. So I think we would all be very much interested to having your view on the situation of Egypt, both domestically and externally, because one of the things that you would all agree on is that it is impossible to separate domestic and foreign affairs entirely.
Sure. Just very quickly, the Middle East generally has been a theater for international engagement because of superpower rivalry in the past, and because we attracted them more than we actually should have as Middle Easterners. I say this because the world has been changing, and we have been changing at the same time. When I was minister, I would occasionally joke, but it was actually true, that my nightmares were easier than my days, because I would wake up and I would see that we have a problem on the western border in Libya. We have a water problem looking south. There's no Arab-Israeli peace process. Problems in the Levant with Syria. You go down to Yemen, there are problems there. Issue of terrorism, a lot of things. So the Middle East has and is going through significant change, both geopolitically, because of what's happening around the world, but also regionally. And as you said, I mentioned the regional conflicts, but the transformations are also going through domestically, throughout the region, including in my own country. We had 2 revolutions in 3 years. That in itself shows you that there was a domestic desire for change. I critically, but in a constructive sense, and I say this back home, this is not something I say abroad only, I've always criticized my own institutions, my own colleagues. We need to be more proactive. We don't have to wait for events to happen. When I moved into the academic environment, I termed it that a lot in the region have a generic resistance to change. And what I see different now is up until 2010, 2015, last few years, everybody in the Middle East was talking about the past. Then suddenly, with 2011 onwards, every government in the Middle East today starts off not with emphasizing their heritage, which is proud, but with emphasizing what they will do for their people in the future. That's also happened in Egypt. We have problems. We're looking for a secure border in Libya. There's progress there, but it's not yet there. Want to solve the water issue. There's no progress there. I'm very candid about these things. We're disappointed with the lack of a peace process between Arabs and Israelis, Palestinians and Israelis in particular, because we want peace for both sides, and so on. We were very busy domestically, because we can't argue that we had 2 revolutions, but it didn't affect our attention. Of course it affected our attention. You pursue foreign policy, to achieve domestic aspirations. In other words, even if you're looking for resources, it is to solve your service requirements. And one thing which is paramount about Egypt in the past and in the future, we live on 2 continents. Sinai is actually in Asia. So we live in Africa, Asia, we live on 2 seas. We import our food, we get our water from abroad, national security capacity from abroad, and we're trying to attract investment. You cannot do that without an active foreign policy. What I've seen recently, this last year in particular, Egypt is much more engaged now in trying to determine movement on regional issues. That's clear in Libya since summer, not this summer, summer of last year. Just a week ago, the Egyptian foreign minister met the Syrian foreign minister, and I would say attended a very well-arranged meeting by Iraq at the General Assembly of regional players in the Middle East with a number of Arab players. We are trying to engage in a dialogue. We engage in a dialogue with Turkey. Slow, it's very slow. Don't be too overly optimistic. It's very slow. I would suggest also we need to engage with the Iranians, and I'm always going to be a proponent of trying to push the Arab-Israeli peace process in all the difficulties. So Egypt had, if you want, it faced a couple of hurdles. The strength of the system, I doubt very few countries in the region and some abroad, frankly, could have survived 2 revolutions in 3 years and come out standing. And we're 104 million, probably by the time we finish this session or this meeting, tomorrow will be a bit more than that as well. They're not going away. 65% are younger than 25 years old. So you will see more activism in terms of Egypt. Just, again, yesterday I think it was announced that we're going to host the environment conference after the one in Glasgow. And we will engage with any country in the region that wants to move forward. Now, you asked about changes in the Middle East. Everybody's talking about moving forward. There's progress on Libya, but I would hope, but doubt, that we'll have the elections in December, but I would love to be proven wrong. It's more important for me to have successful elections. Delayed a month or on time is irrelevant for me, but there's at least desire to have a Libyan solution here, and of course foreign interference has to decrease. I don't see an Arab-Israeli peace process immediately, but there is humanitarian engagement that is a bit more than what it was in the past, but we need to move on that as well. We will support all of our Arab brothers in existential threats that they face in the region. But again, we honestly believe that the way forward is to engage others, not, I mean, in many ways, tough love, if you want. We need to be looking forward. And let me seize this occasion to actually call on Egypt and the Arab countries. I think we should all speak much more about our vision for the future, for the region, what we want to see for the Middle East as a whole, in concrete terms. And by the way, we don't have to agree, but we need to engage in a dialogue, and let's see how much agreement and how much disagreement we have, because allowing others to set the agenda is very dangerous.
Well, thank you very much for these extremely interesting remarks. Now I would like to put 2 aspects together to relate two important aspects of the current situation. On the one hand, we have at least a partial withdrawal of or retreat of the United States. I say partial because I think we should be quite cautious in describing the situation. But whatever the exact term would be, the fact is that some powers took advantage of this situation to intervene in Mediterranean or Middle East affairs in a relatively, I would say, 19th century way. I'm thinking particularly of Turkey and Russia, for instance, typically in Libya or in Eastern Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. So this kind of development, I made a point in my own introductory speech. I repeat, let us make us think more of the 19th century or pre-World War I situation. On the other hand, the second point, from a more sociological viewpoint, we have everywhere in the Middle East a kind of a generation fight between conservatism and modernism. And one of the points which I admire, for instance, in this country is that this rivalry, between generational rivalry, is dealt with in a relatively smooth way, and things are moving in the right direction, but in a smooth way. And I think that in Saudi Arabia they are trying to do the same. In Egypt, the situation seen from outside seems to be much more complicated, maybe because of the size of the population, for historical reason. After all, the Muslim Brothers phenomenon was born in Egypt. And I would like you to comment on that, because what happens, what the future developments in your country will certainly have a huge impact on the rest of the region.
Well, let me start with my own country. The basic challenge between the Muslim Brotherhood and the rest of the Egyptian system was about our identity. Are we Egyptians, including some Muslim Brotherhood, or are we Muslim Brotherhood that have some Egyptians? That's an existential threat. And that's why the clash happened so quickly. That's actually why not only political influencers, but also the middle class were actually against the form of government that was being implemented by the Muslim Brotherhood when they came into power. The Muslim Brotherhood was born in Egypt. There will be some trends in Egypt. But the reality is, if you try to build for the future, then our youth want to be engaged in the world. I have three children, two of whom got their jobs internationally on the internet. I had to compete with the person next door for my job. They're competing internationally, and they were comfortable with that. They're passionately Egyptian, but at the same time, they're part of the world. A dogmatic ideology doesn't fit Egypt. We live on two seas. We need to engage with the world. And I actually think that ideology is a threat to modernity. The influence of the Brotherhood today in Egypt is very highly diminished. And the government presently, whether one agrees or disagrees with some details of policy, is irrelevant, is an activist government trying to respond to the basic immediate needs of the people, but at the same time understands. And that's why I said this last year, you saw this shift between focus only on domestic to having a self-confidence now, which allows me to host the environment conference, which allows me to engage the Turks, which allows me to engage other players in the region. And I see that as a positive. A point made by Dr. Anwar yesterday, which I 100% support. We need to speak together as Arabs. We don't always have to agree. I mean, Arabs are lovely in their ability to agree. Our problem is our inability to disagree. So I actually want a discussion where there are differences of opinion, because understanding your opinion, understanding mine is paramount. Whether we agree or not comes in second best. And the more we engage with our non-Arab partners, the more important it is for us Arabs to speak together as well. So it's not at the expense of priorities here. I see, to go back quickly to Egypt, there's clear evidence of economic progress. Even post-pandemic, we're looking at 4 to 5% growth this coming year, which is significant. It's not enough for us. We need to go up to 8 and 9, but you can't jump from 0 to 8 and 9. Just 3 weeks ago, we issued a new human rights doctrine. Again, it's not perfect. Human rights doctrines anywhere in the, and applications anywhere in the world are not perfect, but it's tremendous progress. And it's a reflection of we want to move forward. The government is focusing on youth. Frankly, I'd like to attract some attention for our age bracket, but it is focusing on youth quite constructively. So short term, it's going to be a challenge. Medium term, I'm much more comfortable. But as an Egyptian, given our weight, given the role that I think we have to play, I also want us to be able to look long term and engage with our neighbors.
Thank you. This is why we introduced a session this morning on the trying to think about the Middle East in 30 years from now. Before I give the floor to some of our members and participants, let me ask you to tell very briefly what do you expect from the Europeans? And when I say the Europeans, I am aware that talking about the Europeans is almost as difficult as talking about the Arabs.
Well, I'll tell you, and I started off by saying we're all in search of identity, from America right through the superpowers into our region, but that also applies, frankly, in Europe. We look at Europe, our traditionally closest friends, and we just don't feel that you're giving us a clear message. And that's obvious. So we're actually engaging Europe quite strongly economically. But the debate on general policy issues is more formal than intense. I love to see a stronger European engagement on how we work on the Mediterranean, and then also on all the waterways, because the discussions over the last few days have shown, for example, the difficulties on supply chains and so on. And I'd emphasize again the point that we've been hearing throughout this conference. We're in this game all together. Nobody can say, I'm going to stay out and then reap the benefits or isolate myself from the negative implications. So you are, as Europeans, strong countries, healthy countries. You have good economies. You have your priorities, I grant you that. I don't want you to embrace ours. But there has to be a level of engagement that is much stronger than it is today. And I would argue here, I don't want to make you Egyptian. You should not try to make me French. But we should try to manage the optimum advantages we get in the relationship and then manage our differences so that they're not detrimental to each other. Europe, in all candidness, and I'll leave my diplomatic experience aside, you need to be a stronger player than where you are today.
I agree, Nabil. Thank you very much. So we have a few minutes for questions. Please, Mr. Ambassador. Former ambassador to France.
Thank you, Terry. Minister Fahmy, welcome to Abu Dhabi. My name is Ali Al-Ahmed. I'm from Ministry of UAE. You mentioned an active foreign policy. If we can take this a step further and in regard to the Abrahamic Accord, which is the peace treaty UAE and Israel. Egyptians were the first to shake hands with the Israelis. Whether it is a war and peace, whether it's a ceasefire, That's not my questions, but UAE doesn't share border with Israel. We never had war with the Israelis. How would we go further from your perspective without losing the Arab public opinion, without being provocative? Because it seems like it doesn't take much. Any small details, any small celebration, anything would be provocative to millions of Arabs. From your perspective, how can we active that from an active foreign policy? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ambassador, for the question. I'm glad you mentioned this because you can't overemphasize that the Palestinian issue per se is a very emotional issue throughout the Arab world, and therefore reactions to it tend to be very strong in either way. Any movement on it leads to one form of reaction. You're also correct in saying we signed the peace agreement with Israel first, and we had part of it was the normalization part, although it didn't grow as quickly at the popular level. My point is the following, and I've said this to my Palestinian colleagues. I understand your concern. I understand your fear. But focus on building your case rather than on criticizing somebody. Because in the case of those who signed the accord, even if you don't agree with them, they've all committed to helping establish and support a Palestinian state. So my recommendation to Arabs, be a bit sensitive to steps that you take. And I want to compliment you for the focus on freezing the settlement activity just before the annexation, just before the Abraham Accords. But you will have to face that this is sensitive. You'll get some criticism. I would tell my Arab colleagues, I would tell the Palestinians, focus, put out the tenets of the peace process. Come up with ideas on how to move forward politically. Don't let the political process die. I don't see today, because of the coalition in Israel, which is very, very strange, but it also reflects a search for identity after 5 elections. I don't see significant early progress on the peace process. But Palestinians and Arabs should not let the Palestinian rights die until we find an opening here. So again, it's all a call for activism. Being sensitive to others, sure, but a country decided to take a step. That's the national right of that country. Let's take advantage of the advantages where they exist, and let's take it as an opportunity to emphasize our case.
Thank you very much. I can take one question and then we have to stop. So who would like to intervene? I don't see, it's hard for me to see. Karl Kaiser. Germany and US.
I would like to come back to a problem that you mentioned, which is so important for the Europeans too, that's Libya. Now, for the Europeans, obviously, it's central. There's the migration problem, there's the political stability, there's the oil question, but it's extremely important for you as a neighbor. So how do you see it evolving, given the involvement also of some outside powers, which has been very important?
Well, to be very candid and straightforward, I actually feel that outside powers who are facilitating or supporting the inclusion of outside military forces are taking detrimental steps in the process. Outside powers who are trying to help push the political process, it's understandable because you had in Libya a failed state. And presently now they're trying to agree on how you create a leader, how you actually create a state. So Libya will require international support to reach a political solution. I support that, but I don't believe that fighting the military battle with outside powers is in any way helpful. And I can, without exaggerating, that could very easily lead to regional conflicts of a military nature, and I don't support that. So let's try to get the Libyans to the ballot boxes. Let's try to get them to establish a government with a unified military and security forces. They will stumble. Let's help them as they stumble in that process. But sending in more troops, foreign troops or fighters, is frankly not only illegal, it's immoral.
Well, thank you very much, Nabil. Unfortunately, the best things have to come to an end. In fact, it is a very good introduction to the rest of the day, and particularly the next session, which has to do with the Middle East and the outside powers. So thank you very much again, and we move now to the next session, and we are on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.